Okay. Well, gentlemen, you've given us a fairly, I won't say rosy, but positive view of the future for orthopedics. There's growth there. There's demographically driven demand. Some of the things that put pressure on the industry now will resolve themselves. Device tax or no device tax, we'll absorb it and move on. There's opportunities for small companies, big companies. Innovation is still there. So that's good for those of us that make the living in the industry. So now let's turn to the fly in the ointment perhaps a little bit. And I want to talk about the FDA. If there's anything that's been beat up more in the past 2 years than the device tax, and that's been beat up pretty good, it's the FDA. To some folks, it seems like we are in an era where the agency is in the product denial business, particularly PMA products. And quite frankly, the statistics there are pretty solid that may be the case. It has increased enforcement action significantly and is increasing the cost and the hurdles for regulatory compliance. So, Bill Kolter, is that our imagination, or do you see it that way also?
Well, I don't know that I'd go so far as to say that they're in the denial business, but certainly, as Bill indicated before, we've seen an increase in the amount of time it takes to receive clearance or approval for products since 2007, when we tracked this stuff for the purpose of the medical device user fees. We've seen, in some cases, inconsistent application of guidance. In other cases, a lack of clear guidance, some perhaps turnover in the reviewers, which could contribute to that inconsistency. And we've seen a relatively aggressive posture on the part of the FDA as far as proposing new rules that could potentially lengthen the time required to get clearance or approval of product, additional requests for clinical data for products where in the past it may not have been required. So certainly the environment has become more stringent with the FDA. That said, we have found Dr. Jeff Shuren, who runs the Device Center, to be accessible and willing to listen to industry. We continue to work with the FDA and with Dr. Shuren, who actually came to Indiana a couple of months ago at the behest of industry. But we continue to work with the FDA, and we're committed to making sure that they understand and that they walk the proper balance between managing risk for innovative new products and allowing patient access to these products. Because it is a balance, it's a tough job, and we need to work together to make sure that the FDA gets it right.
Bill Plovanic, you've been observing this space for a long time. Is this just the pendulum shift back and forth? The FDA seems to be fairly pro-industry, then anti-industry, and we're just in an anti-industry phase, and we'll come out of it? Or do you think things have fundamentally changed for the long term in terms of public policy and how the agency thinks about industry and engages it?
I think that's a very good question. Definitely the pendulum swung to a very conservative stance. I would say, at least, I was at a medical meeting this weekend for diabetes industry. I cover multiple industries, and it was interesting that the commentary from some of the management teams I met with was such that at the end of 2010, early 2011, FDA came to them and said, how can we help you get these products approved? What do you need? So it seems like we went all the way to the edge, and nothing was getting approved. And even companies that hit clinical, I've had companies under coverage that hit clinical endpoints submitted to the FDA, and they said, well, we're going to move the bar, we want this instead. And now it seems like they're pushing through that. I think in 2012, we're actually going to see some of these products get through. Is this a trend back towards the center, or is this election year, we need to get some stuff out and to show we're doing something, and then we'll go back to conservatism? We don't know, but I know that there's been a lot of discussion from industry with FDA and trying to educate the FDA on, we need a set of ground rules. I think something you didn't touch on, but from my standpoint as an analyst, I look at the public companies, I look at the private companies, I look at the ones in development. I can tell you that the venture capital community has almost shut down for the medical device industry. Because if I'm a venture capitalist putting money into a new idea, if I don't know the regulatory pathway, I can't assess the risk. I don't know how much it's going to cost me to get there, so I'm not going to put money in. So, I think the commentary earlier about shifting the whole industry overseas, that's really what's been happening. Let's hope that we're trending back to the middle, but I think we need to get into 2013 to find out if that's the case, and whether it's a function of the administration that's in or not. We'll find out.
So Brian, there's another huge other dynamic to the FDA other than product approvals, and that's regulatory compliance and inspections and tightening standards for manufacturers and so forth. What has the impact of all this been on the supplier base?
Well, I think it's good news, but you have to look at it at 3 levels. The first level is, oh dear, we've got a load of cost, more metrology, more demands, more time, and that puts a lot of people off, and most people don't actually get past the first level. But if you get past the first level, the second level is to then look at your internal costing and in particular your pricing policies to deal with this situation. I think most people in the room wouldn't know what's in their absorption costing rates, but one of the things that you need to be aware of is that if, for example, your quality people are now having to do more, rather than treat them as an overhead to be absorbed, you might want to charge them out as a unique activity, and that in turn builds the estimate up, and that in turn builds the price up. And just to tell you a story, we're working with a company about pricing, and one of the exercises we do is we say to them, go away and sit in a room and think of all the things you do for your customers that you don't charge them for. Because the whole of the orthopedic industry at the moment is hooked up on unit price. It's the unit price of the joint recovers all of its costs. The unit price that you sell to the OEMs recovers all its costs. And they come back with all these activities, and this one guy came back and said, we did this, we've got to do these quality standards, we've got to do papers, we've got to do all sorts of documents. So he went back and charged a different part of the OEM an invoice for $15,000, and it was paid. And I checked up with him a few months ago. He's now at $150,000 that's gone down a different route into the quality area. He's being paid. It's not on the unit price. It's not in the hands of these nasty buyers, if there are any in the room. And he's now at 120,000, which I think is a $5 million business. That's huge. Straight through, bottom line, profit and cost. And then the third stage is if you have a portfolio of products that are very well regulated, that the OEM has got all sorts of approval on, it's going to cost a lot of money to move it out of your facility, so you then have pricing power. So you then have to decide how you're going to use that pricing power. Clearly there's a balance between new work and putting a gun to the OEM's head and saying, you can't move this, so I'm doubling the prices. But again, relating to the aerospace experience, what's happening in the aerospace, the venture capitalists are now becoming more active, and if you move the clock on, they're going along and buying companies in the supply chain that have got a high portfolio of highly regulated products. Then they're going along to the OEMs and in some cases asking for a 100% price increase. 100%. And I was dealing with a situation the other day where the OEM considered itself fortunate to negotiate it down to a 50% price increase.
Well, that thought should warm a lot of hearts here in the room.
You have to take the long game plan. You have to treat it as a business decision, and every problem is an opportunity. And if you're prepared to invest in filling your facilities with highly regulated products that the OEM find very difficult to move at great cost and great time, you've got pricing power, and that's the end game.